Um, so putting yourself first, right? We talked about having kids. I have a son who's 9 years old, right in between your
Mhm.
two.
Uh-huh.
Um, so let me ask it bluntly, and then we'll see where it goes. Should I? Let's use me as the example. Should I view myself as more important than my son? And I ask that. I know some people will be triggered right away by that and think like, no, your kid always comes first. And some people might go the
Mhm.
other way and say, of course, you always
Mhm.
have to put yourself first, and then you take care of your son. I get that
Mhm.
nice sounding answer, but sometimes there's real decisions to be made, like you said, right? You're looking to quit your
Mhm.
job when you have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and
Mhm.
there's some part in your mind, or maybe some people voices outside of you that are like, you're hurting your kids by doing that. You're putting your
Right.
kids at risk. Like, how dare you? Right. And put
Right.
that aside, because who cares what other people say necessarily. But there is a decision point sometimes where you have to say, I need to do this for me, even if
Mhm.
maybe it's not the best decision for my kids, or maybe it puts them in some greater risk than it would have otherwise.
Mhm.
How should
Mhm.
we think about that? Are we more important than our kids? At the end of the day, is it important that we do right by us beyond anything else, and then our kids come very, very close second? Or how do you think about that? Should our kids always come first no matter what?
Mhm. No, kids should never come first.
Mm,
And here's why. I can tell you my own personal story with my divorce, for
sure.
example. So my divorce was something I really, really struggled with. My ex-husband is Filipino. Filipinos do not get divorced. It
Mm,
is not something that culture does. And so it was a big struggle trying to figure out, like, is this the right move? Because in our situation, it uh, it wasn't as bad as most divorces warrant, if that makes sense.
mm,
It's not like he was abusing me. It's not like, it wasn't awful, right? But I knew it wasn't right. And I remember seeing a spiritual counselor about this because I was same like you, like my poor kids,
mm,
like culturally, my ex-husband, of course, culturally was like, we're not getting divorced. I don't want to get divorced. This is not okay. The kids are going to get ruined. It's going to ruin their lives and blah, blah,
mm.
blah, blah, blah. And I remember just struggling with that so heavily and being so concerned that this decision that I was now, this is my decision,
No, it's on you.
right?
Yeah.
It was on me. And I was so afraid that I was going to screw up my kids. The
Mm,
kids are going to be ruined. They're just toddlers. Whatever. All of the things like they're going to grow up with a single mom. And I never wanted that for my kids and
mm,
yada, yada. But I went to meet one of my friends who's a spiritual counselor. And she said to me, your sons will hurt with you.
mm,
If you are hurting, they will hurt with you. If you stay in this marriage and you hurt, they will hurt. So doing what's best for you is always what's best for your kids, regardless of what that decision is. It's never about choosing myself over them. It's about choosing myself and bringing them along for the
mm,
ride because they're going to be better off.
mm. So I believe that. I agree with that. I do. And I think there's a lot of people that would. But let's unpack it a little bit, because then what would be the example of a bad parent? Like what because you can imagine whatever, from TV shows, movies, whatever you want to see. There, we have
Mhm.
examples in our head of like, oh, that's a bad parent, right? Maybe they
Mhm.
abandon their kids.
Mhm.
Maybe they just literally don't show them any love or care about them at all. If it works for them and they feel like, but that's what makes me happier to leave my kids and go do this. Like, is there anything that actually makes a bad parent then? Because how do you find that sweet spot? Like, what is the line for where you're not? Is it possible to hurt them? Is there anything we could do that would hurt
Mhm.
them? It would seem like yes, right? Obviously, if you
Mhm.
abuse them or do something like that.
Mhm.
So like, how do you reconcile that part of it? And again, I'm asking this. I'm glad I'm getting to ask you the questions, because these aren't fun questions, but it's something I think about a lot. Of how do we think about our responsibility to our kids versus ourselves? And if we agree that there is something we could do that could harm them, where is that line, and how do we identify it?
Yeah, and that's really tough because there are certainly bad parents out there. Parents who neglect their children, abandon their children. I believe that if you are operating from a place of heart-centeredness
Mm,
and the best, like your highest and best good, that you cannot hurt your children. I do believe though that some instances, like I know that there are some, like in fact, I've known people who have had parents who have gone off the deep end and left. And quite frankly, as difficult as that is for a child, it was probably the best thing for them at the end of the day. right? And I know that, and this is where the self-awareness piece comes in, right?
Yes.
Because we know that we experience, like, that is extremely traumatic for a child. Like, I've worked with somebody who this has happened to, where his mom left him, and they don't speak today, and he's 43 years old. But she kind of like quit taking care of him when he was about 8 or 9. He has a significant mother wound. That is so difficult and so traumatic for a child. And what happens is, over time, it affects you. It affects you as an adult, well into your adulthood, but it takes you as the adult coming back and healing that in order to let it go. And I think eventually you learn that I'm actually really glad that that happened, because she was using drugs, she was, whatever she was doing, living on the streets, whatever it may be.
Mhm.
And so I think that in the moment, things can feel very difficult and can be traumatic to children. And but I also believe, at the end of the day, if that child or that person as an adult takes the action to work on themselves, they'll heal from it.
Mm.
So yes, I think parents can hurt their children by being selfish,
Mhm.
and take it. And I say that in quotes um, because not every decision that you make to better yourself is a selfish decision, if that makes sense, right?
Does.
I
It does.
left my marriage and started my company to make a better life for me and my kids. My kids didn't even know I worked full time when they were little, because I had my own company and I worked when I worked, and I was at the bus every day,
Mhm.
and I was on vacation with them in the summer. They didn't notice, right? So, like, as even though it was a choice I made for myself to make my life better, it benefited them too.
Mm. Mm.
So I always like to say, no child is without trauma.
Mhm.
No child is without some sort of disappointment or let down from their childhood. We all have baggage. The goal as parents is to only give our kids as much baggage as they can carry in their backpack.
Mm.
Right?
I like that.
Like, we don't want to overload. We don't want them carrying a mountain, like, not a hiking backpack either. I'm talking like a school bag, right? So we can't avoid, like, my divorce may someday, my kids were so young, right? But my son, my 8-year-old, says to me, why can't you just be married to daddy?
Mm.
You know? And so I know that it hurts him, right? But I know that it was the right move for me, which makes it the right move for him.
Mhm.
And if that's a little piece of baggage that he carries in his backpack with him into adulthood, hopefully he'll come around and heal that part of it.
Yeah, and
You
to your
know,
point, if it wasn't that baggage, he would have something else in his
it'd be
backpack,
something
right? It would
else,
always
right?
be something.
It would be me and his dad arguing,
Exactly.
or it would be his dad cheating on me,
Yeah.
or it would, you know what I mean?